Dust surges across the forward line at 0204 hours, pushed flat by rotor wash from the holding aircraft. Visibility is collapsing under 100 yards, and the recovery team is still staged behind her, waiting for clearance they no longer have time for. Higher headquarters transmits another delay, advising the element to remain in place until remote confirmation resolves. The on-scene officer acknowledges, but she sees the terrain changing faster than the guidance arriving from above. Heat drift moves laterally across the wash. Brush lies disturbed along a contour that sensors marked clear. Fuel time on the holding aircraft narrows with every passing minute. If she holds to the remote instruction, the extraction window contracts past safe margin, and the team risks stepping into unstable debris or concealed movement. Her report is ready. The order to wait stands. She is one breath from choosing which reality governs the next 60 seconds. The recovery operation forms under low visibility at 0204 hours. Dust moves in sheets across the dry wash, pushed by rotor wash from an aircraft holding a cautious orbit. Engines idle low behind the forward line, and radios hiss with incomplete traffic. A female Air Force ground combat specialist maintains security on the outer edge. 50 pounds of gear steady on her frame as she watches debris shift in unstable heat near the wreck. Her task is simple in language and complex in consequence. Report. Ground truth before anyone moves. Visibility drops under 100 yards. She answers to the on-scene officer who runs the perimeter, yet distant headquarters continues to push delayed guidance that does not match conditions on the ground. The tension between remote oversight and local responsibility settles on her position. Brush displaced by earlier rotor. Wash sits unnaturally along a shallow bend in the wash, a detail that could signal either wind or movement. Signal integrity degrades. Emission map board marked in red grease pencil rests against a vehicle hood. The primary route shows a narrow corridor through the wash. She measures it silently against what she sees. Perimeter markers tremble as grit moves across the line. A cracked headset mic hangs from her plate carrier, catching brief bursts of static that offer more noise than clarity. Perimeter control weakens. Heat radiates from the wreckage, carrying ignition risk if fuel pockets shift. Every second narrows the extraction window. Her responsibility sits in the space between what sensors claim and what the terrain actually reports. Fuel window narrows. Forward security under strain. Engines hum. Dust rises, and her next observation will determine whether the team advances or holds. The moment tightens, and escalation sits one breath away. Dust still moves through the wash as engines idle low at 0204 hours. The recovery mission is live, and the ground picture remains unstable. A female Air Force ground combat specialist holds forward security, while distant headquarters monitors the operation with incomplete visibility. Signal strength drops again. Perimeter markers tremble under rotor wash, and the red grease pencil map board shows a route that may no longer match the terrain. The cracked headset mic at her collar catches a brief pop of static. Visibility compresses below 80 yards. Stay with the mission, if you value accountable reporting in real operations. Subscribe now and say where you're listening from. The downed aircraft recovery forms across a wide dry wash at 0204 hours. Dust moves in slow sheets across uneven ground, pushed by rotor wash from a circling aircraft trying to hold altitude within its fuel margin. Visibility stays under 100 yards, narrowing and widening as grit shifts along the terrain. Engines idle low near the perimeter, each vehicle angled to create partial cover for the extraction team still preparing to move. Radios pop with intermittent static, carrying fragments of status traffic without clarity. The operation runs inside a narrow window, and every second makes the margin thinner. Signal integrity drops again. The female Air Force ground combat specialist stands forward of the main element, 50 pounds of gear settling into her harness as she maintains a quiet scan across the wash. Brush displaced earlier by rotor wash lies in uneven lines, but some patterns break naturally, while others suggest disturbance from movement that does not match wind direction. She notes the difference without commentary. Her role is simple in description and heavy in consequence, Provide accurate ground truth before anyone advances. The extraction team depends on her observations to avoid walking into a route that may have changed since sensors last updated. Visibility falls below 90 yards. Behind her, the on-scene officer confers with the senior NCO responsible for perimeter integrity. Both answer to distant headquarters, where oversight comes in delayed intervals and often without the specificity required by conditions on the ground. Subordinates maintain proper bearing, acknowledging rank and reporting only what they can confirm. Seniors remain procedural, not speculative. The friction does not come from personalities, but from distance. The farther the command node sits from the train, the wider the discrepancy becomes between official routes and what the ground specialist sees firsthand. Fuel window tightens. Emission map board rests on the hood of a vehicle behind the line, red grease pencil routes marking planned approaches across the wash. The primary corridor shows a narrow gap that sensors once read as clear. Now, grit piles unevenly along its edges, and debris glints faintly under dust-filtered light. The cracked headset mic attached to the specialist's ruck catches bursts of static, each pop reminding her that comms instability is a recurring threat, not a temporary annoyance. Metal ticks as wreckage cools and patches, signaling that some fuel pockets still hold residual heat. Perimeter control weakens on the west flank. The extraction team organizes near the vehicles, checking gear loads, securing litters, and confirming distances spoken clearly as full words. 100 yards to the first marker, 200 yards to the wash bend, 300 yards to the wreck. Each distance carries risk. Wind from the orbiting aircraft pushes grit into helmets and across visors. The specialist measures each shift in debris, each vibration in the perimeter markers, each stutter in the radio net. Ground truth defines survival. Rotor wash scatters loose grit against her boots as she kneels briefly to confirm an angle of displacement near a shallow rise. The pattern does not match earlier sweeps. Behind her, the on-scene officer receives another message from headquarters, advising that the original route remains valid. The officer acknowledges without committing, because the specialist's observations hold more weight than remote confirmation. Liability sits where decisions meet terrain, and she is the only one with direct visual contact on the forward line. Comms integrity degrades on the alternate net. Engines hum at low idle as the recovery team finalizes preparations. Dust thickens near the wash bend, and the specialist notes how reflected heat distorts the air above debris. A misread here could mean moving the team into unstable metal, ruptured fuel pockets, or unseen movement, using the debris as cover. She reports her observations with brevity and accuracy, stating what she sees, not what she assumes. Visibility compresses again. The on-scene officer steps forward, listening to her update, weighing terrain truth against the official corridor marked on the map. Headquarters transmits once more, advising movement soon to preserve extraction timing. The officer hesitates, not from uncertainty, but from responsibility. Authorization to advance lies at the intersection of remote instruction and local assessment. The specialist stands in that intersection, her observations forming the basis for the safer call. Fuel margin declines on the holding aircraft. The senior NCO assigned to perimeter integrity adjusts the west flank slightly, compensating for shifting dust patterns and decreased visibility. The specialist notes the adjustment without breaking her scan. Every movement reflects a tension point in the operation. Fuel clocks limit aircraft endurance. Comms instability introduces risk of missed orders, and visibility compression creates opportunity for unseen hazards. Signal disruption persists. She checks the debris line again. Heat shimmer reflects off metal fragments near the wreck, distorting shapes against the darkness. She watches for movement, patterns, or inconsistencies in the terrain. The extraction team waits on her next report, and the officer waits on the alignment between her ground truth and higher's directive. The map behind her shows a route that once fit the conditions. The terrain in front of her suggests otherwise. Visibility holds at 90 yards but unstable. The next message from headquarters repeats the instruction to move. The officer acknowledges but does not give the order. The specialist continues her scan, noting each minor indicator. Wind patterns shift again. Dust angles change subtly. A discrepancy emerges between the terrain she sees and the corridor on the map behind her. Another signal drop confirms instability. That discrepancy is the first fracture point. It is procedural, not dramatic. It is the moment where events begin to diverge from plan, where the safe route may no longer be safe. Before the officer commits, she reports one more detail, something small, but enough to force reevaluation. And the tension in its accuracy sets up everything that comes next. She works the problem in real time at 0240 hours, standing in the forward line where dust moves in uneven sheets across the dry wash. The wreckage ahead emits a steady heat shimmer that distorts the remaining silhouettes, and visibility compresses under 100 yards as grit rises in the rotor wash of the extraction aircraft holding overhead on a thin fuel margin. She is the enlisted Air Force ground combat specialist assigned to anchor this flank. Her responsibility is ground truth. And tonight, that truth is shifting. Visibility compresses below 80 yards. She notes displaced brush along a contour that should have remained undisturbed. She logs the position, marks it as a potential movement corridor, and feels heat radiating from unstable debris 20 yards to her right. The on-scene officer monitors her updates while relaying procedural guidance from higher headquarters, which continues to reference the official route. That route no longer aligns with what the terrain is reporting. She documents the discrepancy without commentary and keeps her voice steady. Signal degradation increases on the command channel. The cracked headset mic hanging from her ruck taps lightly against a plate as wind pushes through. She steadies it and records thermal drift readings from her handheld device, watching a faint plume move laterally along the ridge instead of rising. That indicates displacement, an indication of presence, not wind alone. She writes the observation in her log with time, position in yards, and her own initials to preserve accountability. She speaks the distance aloud as 150 yards from her forward marker. Fuel reserve drops to minimal margin. Rotor wash increases as the extraction aircraft adjusts pitch to maintain hold, its engines straining under the cooling night air. Dust moves across the perimeter markers, making them tremble. She watches the corridor. Higher headquarters wants the recovery team to use. The thermal signature near its midpoint flickers. She captures the fluctuation with a brief scan and tags it as inconsistent with static debris. Her job is not speculation. Her job is documented observation, and each detail builds the evidence trail. Hostile probe crosses the outer line. The movement is small, one figure, low, testing. She tracks it for 3 seconds, confirms it approaches from the contour she flagged earlier, and reports it to the on-scene officer. No raised voice, no dramatics. He acknowledges and orders a controlled suppression burst from the nearest element. Dust lifts in a short arc. The probe withdraws. She writes the event into her log and marks it as confirmation that the official route lies inside a developing threat pocket. Signal distortion rises on the secondary net. She kneels beside the map board pinned under a ruck. Red grease pencil routes line the terrain, and the official corridor is still highlighted. She draws a new path along a safer contour she has already traced with her readings and observations. It curves along firmer ground, outside the thermal anomalies, and avoids the disturbed brush. She states the proposed reroute to the on-scene officer. He listens and then relays upward exactly as procedure demands. Comms integrity weakens again. Higher headquarters replies with a request for further confirmation before authorizing any change. She hears the partial packet. Hesitation. Then a call for more data. She gathers it. She moves 10 yards to a higher patch, logs a second thermal reading, scans the displaced brush with a low-light monocular, and records the consistency of footprints in the wash. Weight distribution suggests more than one individual moved there earlier. She notes all of it. Time, readings, angle, temperature differentials. She does not argue the point. She documents it. Thermal variance increases along the ridge. When the next hostile probe emerges, this one closer, moving with more certainty, she tracks it with calm precision. The perimeter element fires a controlled warning burst that breaks its advance. The probe withdraws again. She logs it. Second confirmation of hostile intent along the official corridor. She transmits the evidence packet to the on-scene officer, who sends it upward, citing escalation indicators and perimeter pressure. The official route is now untenable by the standards outlined in their own procedures. Visibility drops below 70 yards. She invokes emergency authority under the clause that allows the senior enlisted combat specialist on location to issue a reroute when imminent risk to the team exceeds acceptable thresholds. She states the grounds for invocation: documented instability in the corridor, hostile probes confirming intent, thermal drift inconsistent with debris, and narrowing fuel window. She states time, 0250 hours. She states responsibility, her position, her role, and her duty to safeguard the recovery element. Command channel cuts out mid-sentence. The on-scene officer acknowledges her authority and instructs the recovery team to follow her revised path. She moves to the start of the new route, checking each marker, verifying footing along the wash edge, and ensuring the extraction aircraft remains within support distance. Engines overhead shift pitch again, strained but stable. Dust moves around her boots in tight spirals as she signals the first element through. Fuel window tightens again. The recovery team advances along the rerouted path. The threat pocket remains behind them, untriggered. She watches the corridor she rejected, heat flickering, brush still disturbed, a shape moving briefly inside the dust. She marks its position, but does not pursue. Her responsibility is protection, not confrontation. The suppressed threat remains contained, and the team gains distance. Comms clarity improves on the local net. She relays the forward team's progress to the on-scene officer. The debris field lies ahead with a safer approach angle. Heat shimmer off the wreckage rises in uneven patterns, but the contour is clear of hostile movement. She confirms the path and prepares to anchor the flank as the team moves into position. Authority shifts to ground truth. She logs the moment the reroute is executed: time, direction, justification, and evidence trail. She writes it calmly on the board and transmits the update upward now that the channel stabilizes. The hostile probe no longer threatens the corridor. The recovery team is positioned to reach the aircrew. The immediate threat is contained, and the record shows precisely who made the call and why. Dust settles slowly in the wash as the extraction aircraft shifts to a more efficient hold. Engines ease down to a steady idle, and rotor wash no longer drives debris in uncontrolled arcs. The recovery team moves under safer conditions because her reroute has taken effect. And the corridor that once threatened them is now outside their path. The environment stays unstable, but the immediate pressure has been managed through disciplined action and documented evidence. Comm stability returns on the primary channel. She stands with the grease pencil mapboard resting against a cooling engine block, the unsafe routes crossed out with deliberate marks. The cracked headset mic at her side reflects a thin line of light from debris still ticking as residual heat dissipates. Each symbol around her reinforces the same point. Nothing she did relied on instinct alone. Every step is recorded, time stamped, and aligned with the standards required of an enlisted Air Force ground combat specialist operating under U.S. authority. Fuel margin holds above minimum for extraction. Chain of command integrity remains intact. She did not bypass authority. She used the clause written for exactly this scenario, where ground truth diverges from remote oversight and lives depend on immediate correction. The on-scene officer acknowledged her evidence. Higher headquarters received her documentation, and the record now shows a clear procedural path from observation to decision. No one raises their voice. No one frames the moment as defiance. It is duty carried out in accordance with established rules. Dust drifts through visibility still under 100 yards, but the tone around the perimeter shifts. The recovery team advances with greater confidence, and the perimeter elements maintain posture without the earlier strain. Her logs, her readings, and her controlled assertions form the backbone of what happens next. Duty sets the standard. In this stabilized moment, the mission continues under clarity. What she saw, what she recorded, and what she enacted now stand as the accountable foundation for the remainder of the operation. The path forward is defined, and responsibility is fully aligned with documented fact. Dust drifts in slow patterns across the wash as engines idle low near the cooling wreckage. Visibility remains under 100 yards, and grit moves along the perimeter markers with each small shift of air. The recovery team is safe for now, but the operation exposes a recurring tension inside any chain of command. The distance between remote oversight and the person holding the line. Comm stability fluctuates on the primary net. The grease pencil map board shows the unsafe corridor still crossed out, a clear record of the moment when ground truth outweighed procedure. The cracked headset mic rests beside scattered grit, its surface tapping lightly as the rotor wash settles. None of this erases the fact that higher headquarters expected compliance, while the on-scene officer relied on her judgment under pressure. Your judgment matters here. So the question stands. When an enlisted ground combat specialist sees a preventable threat that remote command misreads, do you follow the official route and risk the team? Or do you document the evidence and invoke emergency authority to reroute? Answer that choice directly in the comments. Engines cool along the wash, ticking softly as the last rotor pulse fades into the distance. Dust settles in a thin layer over the mission map board, now marked with completed routes. The cracked headset mic rests beside a cooling metal surface, and perimeter markers stand steady in improving visibility beyond 100 yards. The operation shifts into after-action review, where logs, statements, and chain of command assessments proceed without urgency or dispute. Radio traffic settles on the primary net. The mission's record is intact. Every decision, every reroute, every confirmation stands documented for accountability and continuity. The environment around the wreck grows quieter, and residual static on the net clears into a low, stable hiss. Nothing here is framed as triumph. It is simply the conclusion of a task executed under pressure by personnel working within U.S. authority. Next mission already inbound. If you found value in this account, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stand by for the next mission. It is already waiting.